My name is Paul Riddle, and I'm the chair of the steering committee for the Siburt Institute Chaplains Fellowship. And we have been working for about a year now to help the Siburt Institute become recognized as an endorser for people who are seeking certification as professional chaplains. And the Siburt Institute Chaplains Fellowship is another dimension of this work that is really intended to be an informal network of chaplains and allied professionals and other folks who consider themselves allies of chaplaincy and spiritual care for purposes of education and networking and fellowship and spiritual growth and mutual support. And so this today is our inaugural event. We'll be offering these lunch and learn sessions the first Thursday of every calendar quarter, beginning today. James Denham, who is a staff chaplain at Texas Children's Hospital, will be the presenter for our next lunch and learn in September. And we will send out publicity about that as we get closer to that event. And I want to extend a hearty welcome to all of you. And we are recording today's session for the benefit of those who are not able to join but may want to view this at a later time. Our presenter today is Dwayne Lee. And Dwayne is also a member of the steering committee as a professional chaplain. And I will let you, Dwayne, introduce yourself. And I'm just going to turn it over to you. I'm going to ask, if you will, please, those of you who are not already muted, if you will mute yourselves unless you're talking. If you have a question or a comment as we go forward, just unmute yourself, speak up. But we'd like to keep everybody who's not speaking muted to reduce the cross noise, phones ringing, and all that kind of stuff. So, Dwayne, take it away.
Hello, everybody. I just want to thank everybody and Paul for just the opportunity to lead this discussion. My name is Dwayne Lee. I am a chaplain. I am the director of chaplaincy service at Terrell State Hospital. And I have been working in chaplaincy for 10 years. And I've been board certified for 4 of those years. I was really excited to do this presentation because I am also a doctoral student at Union Theological Seminary, and this is actually my focus, the thing that I am focused on in school. So I would definitely appreciate everybody being here. I would also ask for prayer, because anybody knows about anything about doctorate, it seems to take forever to finish it. So we are going to go ahead and get started. Let me go ahead and I want everybody to bear with me because I'm now learning how to use PowerPoint. And if everybody could see it, we are going to go ahead and start the slideshow. And what we are going to be talking about is the divine of many colors, pastoral care to the racially traumatized receiver. And so I want to get us started by going over Eddie's story. This is a case study that I wanted to share with anybody. And if it's okay with you, I'm going to ask everybody to, on the case study, to unmute themselves for a minute. And really, we're going to work through this case study together. And so I'm going to go in different parts of the case study. I'm going to ask some questions, and I just want to get what everybody thinks, their input. So this Eddie's story. Eddie is a 30-year-old Latino American patient who arrives at the Dallas Hospital ER. He is a victim of a gunshot wound. Eddie begins screaming in Spanish that he is in pain. Eddie receives pain medication and begins to relax. After the medication begins to take effect, Eddie heard some of the discussion of the medical team. Eddie heard phrases like, "Here we go with another one." And he also heard somebody sarcastically say, "I wonder how he got shot." And so my first question to the group is, what are some of the things in the beginning of this case study that concerned you in hearing it? From the actions of the medical team, or some blind spots that you were aware of?
I'll start out. The very first thing that sends up a red flag for me is the medical care team is talking about the patient as though the patient were not able to hear, and as though the patient were actually not, there. They're talking about him like he's an object. That they don't seem to be mindful that he's hearing what they're saying.
Thank you. That is a good observation. Thank you, Paul. Anything else?
Well, as a former paramedic and hanging around EDs for some of my life, I'd be concerned about the patient care he's going to receive. That sounds like a pretty burnt out ED team who might not pick up on things if they had a different attitude about what they were doing and the patient they were treating.
And I think that's really important, because as chaplains, and if you worked in an ER before, there is a lot of moments where the staff is burnt out and the staff is tired and exhausted, and sometimes handle from anywhere from 5 cases in an hour to 20. And so it's important to note that most of the time when things happen, it's important to also understand what the staff is going through. That they're not intentionally meaning to be mean or intentionally meaning to be insensitive. But sometimes when we get exhausted and burnt out, some things kind of come out of our mouths that we don't really want to. And as we continue going on the story, it says, after wounds were attended, Eddie had woken up, and the first thing he did was requested a chaplain to check in on him. When the chaplain, a 25-year-old white female, we're going to call her Marissa, arrived at the room, Eddie was suspicious. But Marissa sat down, looked at him in his eyes, introduced herself. Eddie began to cry and shared in English his experience in the ER. Just out of curiosity, what did Marissa do that was a little bit different than everybody else that gained Eddie's trust?
She addressed the patient by name, giving him dignity.
Mm-hmm. Anything else? I think that's one of the most important parts. And now we're going to go back to an observation that Paul had. The observation was just because Eddie spoke Spanish when he was in pain, there was an assumption that he only spoke Spanish. And for those who work in a hospital setting, that is sometimes a familiar situation that we come across. And so as pastoral caregivers, Marissa was not only supposed to provide emotional support to Eddie, which she did. She saw, she first didn't assume anything. Started the conversation of seeing Eddie's person, and thank you for bringing that up. But also another important thing was looked him in his eyes. Every act that she did was trying to make sure that she was aware of Eddie's personhood. So my question is, as we end the case study, is as people that provide pastoral care in just everyday settings, not only the pastoral care given to Eddie, what would you have done to follow up with the medical team from your own experience? Is there any suggestions just from your own experience that you would have? One of the most powerful things is sometimes the medical team is, from my experience, is a team full of compassion, full of love. And honestly, you only work in medicine if you love it. And so sometimes simple education saying, I just want to let everybody know that Eddie does speak English, or Eddie did feel a little uncomfortable with the discussion of ER. And in many cases, the medical team is actually relieved that you bring these kind of things up, because they want to know sometimes how they engage the medical team, and sometimes they look to a chaplain to sometimes help them understand certain things. And then we're going to go into some.
Dwayne, can I add a little thing?
Please.
What I'm intrigued by is that, like in the situation you're just sharing about, the experience happens in one place, but I think she was visiting the patient in another, and I think that also gets into some interesting advocacy questions. How do I advocate to the staff that's in the EC that was experiencing one thing when the staff that's in front of him and caring for him now may be an entirely different set?
That's right. What is interesting, and James, I was gonna tell you the end of the story, is the medical team, the patient made an actual complaint, a written complaint to the ER team that was administering to them. And so it was not only the chaplain's responsibility to go ahead and provide that support to the patient, but they also had to do a meeting with the team to give them education and information about what happened. And that's exactly what happened. They had to come in on their time off, and there was education that happened, but they were also, and I love how people brought this up, they were saying, I can't believe I did that. One of the other comments was made was, that was the 13th case that came in. I was so exhausted. I was so burnt out that I had no idea that I did that at that moment. And it became an opportunity for the chaplain to provide not only education, but actually emotional support to the team, because they knew that I don't really believe that. I don't really feel that way. But when I was burnt out, some things just come out in emergency moments. Thank you, James, for bringing that part up. And so that's kind of sometimes the world of what a chaplain has to engage with, sometimes on a daily basis. And so to really bring it to a spiritual setting, I want to bring up two scriptures. The first one is Romans 10, starting at verse 12. For there is no difference between Jew and Gentile. The same Lord is Lord of all, and richly blesses all who call on him. And I also want to bring up Galatians 3, 26 to 28. So in Christ Jesus, you are all children of God through faith. For all of you have been baptized into Christ, have clothed yourself with Christ. There is neither Jew nor Greek, neither slave nor free, nor is there male or female, for all are one in Christ Jesus. If you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. One of the things that I find very striking about both of these passages, especially the one in Romans, is I wanted to give a little background into that. Paul is actually writing to a church that had to deal with persecution, and the Jewish community had to leave Rome for their own safety. When they returned back, they were they found their house church now being led by Gentile believers. And so there was tension between the Gentile believers that were continuing on the work and the Jewish community that was coming back. And there were also levels of tension when it comes to Roman society between men and women. There was also levels of tension because in Rome at that time, there were certain levels of social class. There were slaves, there were servants, there were the quote common people, and there were the ruling class. And so in the church in Rome, members of the house church incorporated all these different subgroups. And so Paul is not writing just this, he's not giving a mental exercise saying there is no difference, saying he's not taking away the mindset that there's a difference. He is saying this is the goal. This mindset needs to be the goal that we all strive for in the Roman church. We need to find a commonality because of the vast differences in Roman society. And that level of tension was not only in the church in Rome, but was also in the church of Galatia as well. And so one of the things that I wanted to bring up spiritually is the concept of seeing no difference is not an end all be all. It doesn't just happen in a moment. It's actually a working process that sometimes takes a lifetime to not just accomplish, but to continually be more sensitive to. And as a case study brings up, this is actually a case study on a racial trauma incident that actually happened. And so in my studies, I'm trying to continue to understand the complexities of race and how it impacts the patient, the chaplain and patient dynamic. And I've done multiple interviews with professional chaplains who have admitted a level of anxiety when it comes to engaging the topic of race, because sometimes it's a fear of saying something wrong or offending somebody or even causing a more emotional damage than it's already happened. And so chaplains sometimes feel tempted to move away from difficult conversations in regards to race. And so I've been trying to explore what it looks like not to move away, but kind of move a little towards these conversations. And so I want to ask everybody some reflection questions. These are not questions that you need to answer right now, but just throughout the dialogue, just to keep them on your mind. The first question, what does it mean to have a healthy racial identity? The other question is, what does it mean to experience racial trauma? Another question is, why does the challenge of the passages like Galatians and Romans still resonate with us as human beings today? Another is, what is the difference between accepting one's racial difference and honoring one's racial difference? And another question is, what is the difference between being culturally competent and culturally humble? And I define, and I like to define racial identity from Janet Helm's work. She does work on racial identity theory. And she describes racial identity as a sense of group or collective identity based on one's perception that they share a common heritage with a particular racial group. Racial identity development entails changes or shifts in worldview, the byproduct of a series of experiences, self-reflection, and moral decisions. And so when it comes to racial identity, the best way to engage someone about racial matters is to first have a healthy racial identity within your own self. And that goes in three different ways, three different steps. First is intrapersonal, which means how do I view myself as a racial being? And so it's really important is rather than avoiding race, maybe it's possible to engage race internally. And so ask yourself, how do I view myself in my racial narrative? And then the other way is interpersonal, is how do I view my race in general, historically, right now, in this time period, and how do I view my race socially? One of the things that I believe, and I've talked to some of the other chaplains, is when a chaplain fully sees themselves in their racial identity, internally, within their own race and the race of others, they're able to move through the feelings of the different racial feelings they could possibly have. Some people have shame about their race and how they feel about others. Some people have a level of superiority. And some have like feelings in between those feelings. Some have a mixture of feelings. Some have multiple ones. And one thing that in starting to explore your own racial identity, you equip yourself with different ways of viewing your own race. And that goes beyond just the present moment, but it goes to historical. What does it look like to view my race beyond the framework of American society? What does my Scottish heritage look like? What does my Irish heritage look like? What does my Nigerian heritage look like? What does my Latin heritage look like beyond the American scope? Because what some people discovered in just exploring that was within their own families, within their own bloodlines, they've had moments where they have been the oppressor, and they have moments where they have felt oppressed, and they were able to connect to some of those feelings. And so one of the powerful things a chaplain can do is be aware of their own racial identity and have a deeper level of racial self-awareness. And then we go into racial trauma. And I define trauma as, by Brown says, is a wound of psyche, one that spills over the dam of people coping strategies, flooding them with intolerable effects. And so one of the things about trauma is it takes us away from our balance, our normal. And we are shook emotionally, physically, psychologically, spiritually. And we're trying to find our way back to our center, back to our balance. And ethno racial trauma has been defined as individuals or collective psychological distress or fear of danger resulting from experiencing or witnessing discrimination, threats of harm or violence, or imitation directed at an ethno-racial minority group. And so that goes into a little bit more of when you're dealing with a traumatic event, how that impacts, how it connects to a racial situation. And that is sometimes, not all the time, not most of the time, but sometimes what our patients experience even in hospital situations, whether they experience it at the hospital directly or they experience it before they even came into the hospital, that still impacts them to this day. And there are multiple levels of racial trauma that are possible, but I just wanted to address just three today. The first one is bias, and that is could be possibly unconscious, but it's a racial harm, conscious or unconscious, that is caused by somebody else. And so that is a large spectrum of different possibilities. The other one is microaggressions. And these are subtle ways to diminish the race of another. And the difference between bias and microaggression, it has a tinge of deliberate intention connected to it. And then you have traumatic events. And these are events that occur that leave a lasting effect on a person's psyche. And before we go into detail about biases, does anybody have any questions or any thoughts that just they wanted to share? And as we go into detail, we'll go into unconscious and conscious bias. Unconsciousness is some of the things that lead to our behavior when we're even unaware of it. That's anywhere from sometimes holding on to a purse when a minority comes close, to that's anywhere from changing our language when somebody who is different comes around. That's anywhere from just frustrations that just come out when we see somebody who's different. And these acts and these behaviors are not always consciously driven. They're actually sometimes in our unconscious, but they come out when we least expect them. And the other part is the conscious bias. Is there are situations where there are stories or perceptions or stereotypes. I mean, for example, all Black men are criminals, or because somebody speaks a different language, most of the time they do not speak English, or all Trump supporters are racist. There are these little perceptions, there's these stereotypes, there's these beliefs that are sometimes so stuck in the subconscious that we are unaware we have these beliefs until they come out in very unexpected times. And then we go into microaggression. And there, I wanted to bring up just 3 different kinds of microaggressions right now. And these are just subtle ways that people try to diminish the race of another person. One of them is called a microassault. It's a subtle physical act that diminishes the race of another. Sometimes when minorities or different races are being followed in the store because they think that somebody's going to steal something. There's also micro insults that people experience. There's a phrase called "you speak so well," or "you're not like them," and sometimes it sounds like a compliment, but it actually has sometimes the adverse response, and some people feel kind of confused, kind of bewildered when they hear comments like that. And there are also micro invalidations. These are just subtle ways that when you deny the reality or the perception of another person, sometimes the comments saying bad apples, or we're not talking about your race specifically. Now, I want everybody to really pay attention to just some of these words. These words can be used for any race. And I want to also everybody to make aware of that any race could actually bring these biases and these microaggressions to somebody else. So there might be some cases where we are doing harm to others racially and we just don't even know it. And then we talk about racially traumatic events. And there are 4 different types that I wanted to share today. And one of them is the physical. And so I'm going to give some examples of an example of a physical trauma. One chaplain brought up in a situation in San Francisco where one of her Asian American patients was assaulted at the beginning of COVID-19. And they wanted to really talk through what happened. Another one is vicarious. That means when you experience a trauma that you see on TV, or you read on the news, or you see in another form of media. One of the biggest ones that we experienced together was the video of George Floyd. And everybody had emotions in that situation. It was time for everybody to say, well, I was feeling something so different, but I was still feeling something. And then the other one is historical. Historical is connected to how one race has been engaged historically throughout time. And so that could be anywhere from events of the Holocaust, anywhere from slavery, events of forced relocation, events of so that happened in history of humanity. That is believed that trauma travels in one's racial history. And the other one is transgenerational. And one of the examples is a chaplain that brought this situation up is their father, who is African-American, was assaulted by a police officer. And that trauma stayed with their father for a very long time. And what ended up happening is that person felt very uncomfortable communicating with other white people, talking with other white people, to the point where they raised their child in that kind of environment. And so they had limitations on white friends, and they just couldn't understand why until the chaplain and the father went to a retreat that was predominantly white, and their father refused to come out of the room, and the chaplain got so angry. He's like, "Why are you embarrassing me like this?" And then the father was able to finally share a story about how that assault impacted the way the father saw race, interact with people who were racially different, and how that father raised the child, raised the chaplain. That still impacts how the chaplain even views race today. And so those are just even 4 different ways that racially traumatic events impact all of us. So I want everybody to really kind of lean into that just a little bit. I'm wondering, just in the community here, if we all have any kind of form of racial trauma, no matter what race we are, that we are still dealing with today, that is even hard for us to talk about, whether it was physical, whether we saw it on TV, whether we saw it historically, or whether we saw it with how we were raised. And there's so many different complex stories even in that. And what I want to just open us up to is the fact that maybe that is probably a shared space that we can start having some really important conversations. And I will also say that that I didn't create these out of my imagination. These are some of the incidences that patients, family members of patients, and chaplains have engaged with in my interviews. And so we're going to go to the difference between what a color wheel looks like. I really like the space where it says we are all children of God. And I wonder if we can actually, my wife introduced me to this color wheel. I had no idea there was such a thing called color theory. My wife got her master's in art, and she introduced me to color theory, and she said that every color has a story, and how colors are combined has a narrative within itself, and every color has a feeling, has a meaning, has a narrative. And I'm not gonna lie to you, I just had the 6 colors of the rainbow and black and white. That was the only colors I was thinking of. And she opened me up to hundreds of different colors. And then I started thinking about what it means to honor somebody's racial difference, accepting and saying, I'm okay with it, but honoring is, I want to learn more, and I want to understand more about this difference, the beauty of it, the power of it, the amazing parts of it. And I wonder if one came into that color wheel with a patient and says, I want to be the student of your experience. It's amazing when I talk to chaplains, says, when when they look at it that way, and they become the student rather than the spiritual leader. The student, the patient goes from being a powerless person on a bed to a teacher of their racial and cultural experience. And that gives them a little bit of agency, that gives them a little bit of power, a little bit of strength as they're in a powerless situation in being in the hospital. And that is the part I want us to just really be aware of for ourselves, is within all of us, we are so many different shades of color. One of the problematic things that I've noticed in my studies is a difference between saying a white person or a European person and labeling everybody else as people of color. That kind of takes the white person out of the color wheel, out of the group, and almost dismisses them. But the reality is as a Californian, I have seen different colors of Europeans. I have seen the really, really tan. I have seen the really, really light skinned. I have seen so many different shades, but it's not only on skin color, but it's also on experience. We have those who have experienced other races throughout their lives, to those who have never really experienced another race. And that is actually a part of everybody that comes into a hospital setting. That's actually a part of almost every chaplain story. Every story is unique. And here's another part. Gender comes into the play. When we talk about race and gender, there are certain different ways that different females experience their racial selves within their own race. And then you go to all different levels, all different stories, rich, poor, all different belief systems. And then you go to another part of unique, is no matter how much we seem to share a similar physical framework as another person, we all have unique stories, even within our race, even within our families, even within our households, that bring our particular narratives together. And then here's the other part, is while we accept it, I wonder if it's possible for us to move towards the other person by realizing that we are connected, that we are all parts of one body. So when I think about the physical body, I'm gonna need to know how the esophagus works to keep it healthy. I'm gonna need to know how the liver, the brain, how the fingers work to keep health, to keep my body fully functioning. And I wonder if that gives us an invitation to say, let's get to know more and more about this complex racial and cultural world within ourselves, within our own race, and within the race of others. And then we talk about the role of a chaplain. So a chaplain has a lot of roles, but I want to focus on 5 just for now. One of the roles of a chaplain is to bring awareness to the hospital community. Another role is to validate their patient's experience and their staff experience. Another one is to have compassion. Another one is to advocate. And another one is to empower. And so I asked the question earlier, what is the difference between being culturally competent and culturally humble? And so I kind of listed a little bit. And so when it comes to awareness, a culturally competent way, and when I say culturally competent, that is not actually a bad thing. I think everybody needs to be responsible for being culturally competent. But I think it's possible for chaplains to be held to a little bit more of a deeper standard by being culturally humble. And so one of the ways is just to be aware. Culturally competent means to understand that one is different and does whatever it takes not to offend that person. There is nothing wrong with that. I actually encourage it in some cases. But when it comes to being culturally humble is when a chaplain has a healthy racial identity and they come into the room and they are curious about one's difference and one's experience, and they become the student of that experience. Another element is validation. To be culturally competent, say that situation must have been very scary for you, and kind of leave it there. The reason why chaplains are sometimes asked to come into a room is because other clinicians will hear something, but they have to focus on their part of the job. Say, chaplain, I heard a little something about this, about the person discussing about their race or their culture. Can you unpack this or follow up a little bit more about this? And so the chaplain will go and say, what you described sounds scary, but help me understand what that scary experience was like for you. And compassion is, I believe there's two different levels of compassion. Everybody, I think, I like to hold to the standard that everybody is sympathetic. Everybody cares. Everybody has feelings of sorrow when they see somebody in pain. But empathy is a little bit deeper, going into that journey of trying to understand what it's like to be in the other person's shoes, or the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. And then the advocacy. I like to defend everybody. But sometimes I realize that culturally competent is I'm a voice to the voiceless. And I can't tell you how many times that helps people. But there is another level, a deeper level of cultural humility where they journey with the individual and they connect that individual to the power within them so they can find their own voice to speak out for themselves. And then the empowerment part is when you come into the room as an authority of anything, just listening to somebody gives them a sense of agency, a sense of power. But to go deeper into that is to be the spiritual and emotional student to the person's experience. And that goes a little bit deeper, where we kind of as chaplains, we kind of let go of our authority just a little bit. So we can say, in this case, we want to be the student of you. And then the other part is seeing, I love this part, the Imago Dei, seeing ourselves as the image of God. And that power is, how do we experience God multiculturally? And it's an opportunity to just experience God's creation. And I like to think of an image because my wife, who's an artist, brought it up. It's like a person going through a museum. People that really spend time in a museum spend time at each painting and try to see what they're feeling, try to interpret, try to learn about the painting before they go off to another one. And maybe that's the way we can start learning the complexity of our racial self-awareness, our racial self-identity. And maybe that's the way we can really see the blessing of God's amazing tapestry. And I think, I can only speak for myself, I think that's been one of the most important blessings I've had in my work as a chaplain. And I'm gonna go ahead and close this out so we can just leave the room for just discussion, if that's okay. And now everybody can go off of mute. And we were at 12:40.
This
Go
is
ahead.
Tom. I really appreciate your sharing today. I really like the way you concluded too, that we're all part of God's creation and we're all blessed by one another. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you.
Yeah, and I really want to affirm the distinction that you draw between cultural competence and cultural humility. I think that there's, a real difference between just good enough and something that's actually what's appropriate to come alongside a person. And I think that, cultural competence is sort of that's the minimum standard. But I think we need to be striving for something a little better. I think we owe it to the person in front of us to strive for something a little more than mere competence.
Paul, I think you're right.
And it also sees a person's race as a part of their identity, and their identity as a strength, as a blessing, as a gift from God. And it also treats differences between individuals, including racial differences, as a potential asset for learning together, for the building of relationship and so forth, that the world is a richer place as a result of there being more kinds of people in it, rather than, diversity being a problem.
Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you. How about anybody else? With that, Paul, I think we're at 12 minutes early, I believe.
Well, I think that is absolutely fine. That does leave an opportunity. First of all, Dwayne, I want to thank you for this presentation. It's been excellent. It's a really good way of starting this series of Lunch and Learn sessions. Also, our next presenter is going to be James Denham. I forget the exact date, but it's whatever the first Thursday of September is.
I think it's the first Thursday of October.
I'm sorry, the first Thursday of October. James, would you like to give us a little preview?
Sure. So I'm a pediatric chaplain, and so that means that if I'm going to present, I probably ought to bring something that's unique to what I do, and so one of the things that I think is pretty consistent across the board, from pediatric chaplaincy to adult chaplaincy, but we do a little bit more in pediatrics, is thinking about the role of humor, the role of play, and the role of laughter. And actually, it seems like a silly topic, but we have to engage those kinds of things, because most times when we establish rapport with people who we sit with, there needs to be some way to cut through the seriousness, for them to see us as human beings, to see us as human beings like themselves. And so I have a couple of case studies in mind where we might think about humor and play and laughter at the bedside, and what the gifts are, what the challenges are, and hopefully it'll be a time of encouragement, but also a time of challenge for us in our ministry.
All right. Well, that's great. I want to thank everyone for your participation and invite you to continue to join us for these events. We will be planning other Siburt Institute events. I did get a note from Renee, and I think it was to all of us, that the next Lunch and Learn will be on October 6th. So pay attention to Renee, don't pay attention to me. Same time, 12 to 1 Central Time. So with that, we'll sign off. Thanks again. Blessings on your day.